diving into the cost effectiveness of hiring a temporary employee, even for 3 months, can change the trajectory of the laboratory. Outsourcing costs a bunch of money.
Hi, my name is Brian Tabb, and I'm sitting with Gillian Bass to talk about their 2025 NSH poster, The High Cost of Understaffing, a case study in surgical pathology consequences. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Could you start by just telling us a little bit about your poster?
Sure. I do want to give credit to Emily Nangano. She is the sole creator of this poster, and it was presented at another conference, AAPA. But this poster is just highlighting, the cost of understaffing and the use of temporary staffing inside of the laboratory and just the cost effectiveness of that, because sometimes on paper it might seem more expensive to have temporary staff compared to when you really dig deeper, you see the cost of not having it staffed in general.
Yeah. So what were some of the things people did when they were understaffed that caused these issues?
Outsourcing is a main thing. So you have a laboratory who's now outsourcing, the things that need to be grossed or whatever the case may be to LabCorps or Quests, which costs a greater cost.
Right.
And then also just having a vacancy, which causes them to fall behind. And then the cost of getting that caught up, with overtime or whatever the case may be, that cost of having a vacancy on your team for a prolonged period of time is just greater than what it would be to just hire a temporary staff member or two.
Yeah. And how long did you guys find it took for a company to recover when they were understaffed, trying to refill those roles?
I would say minimum, it can take 6 to 8 weeks to get caught up on the material itself, but just to backfill those roles can take anywhere from 1 to 2 years. I'm sure there's other cases where if you're in a high populated area like California, you can fill those roles faster, but it can take a greater time if you're not using an agency or whatever to fill those roles. It could take upwards of 2 years or so to fill those roles.
Yeah. And did you find like any role was more significant than another one for understaffing issues?
Honestly, maybe I'm biased, but histotechs, I think just, even being at this conference and talking to people, everyone from laboratory leaders to histotechs, there's a nationwide shortage for histotechs. And there's so many of them in the lab, which leaves vacancies, of course. But for us, we staff pathologist assistants, histotechs, cytotechs, even MLS, MLT, and I can't say that there's one is not more important than the other, so I don't.
They all cause issues within laboratories.
Yeah, if you have a vacancy with any of those positions, it can cause an issue.
Backlogs and issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you found interesting with this poster, like that you were surprised about?
Since I've been in staffing for so long, it's not a surprise to me. These are things that within the staffing agency or just field, we deal with these problems all of the time. That's why we're here, But I think this enlightens everyone. People who are not in staffing don't understand the magnitude of having a vacancy on their team. Even like HR folks were surprised by the numbers and the figures that Emily has put together. Yeah,
the idea that it is more cost effective to get temporary staffing to outsource and get behind, or
right,
trying to find that perfect candidate. They're better off just filling the whole need for now and finding a permanent staff later.
Right, because when you think about it, that's my whole job is I have a pipeline of candidates, whereas if you think about an HR member for a certain laboratory or hospital system, they can't spend their whole day finding a certain person, whereas I can put that person in front of you today, and it might only take me a few hours, whereas it could take them weeks, or God forbid they have to work overtime to fill this role, that's costing them hours. So, yeah.
Was there a particular hospital or agency or place that they got this data from to determine the...
That's an excellent question. I believe this came from Emily's own place that she was working at, and I'm blanking on the spot at this moment. But these figures came from herself. She was in laboratory leadership, so I think she was involved in this shortage.
Yeah.
As laboratory leaders in HR, I urge them to to break down the numbers for temporary staffing and not lump it into the costs of, because sometimes those numbers and those figures can get lumped together, and you can see it as a whole number instead of breaking it down into contingent labor, and the figure might look larger than what it actually is.
Right.
And sitting down and actually diving into the cost effectiveness of hiring a temporary employee, even for 3 months, can change the trajectory of the laboratory. Outsourcing costs a bunch of money.
Yeah, and even beyond and they're probably just looking at the cost itself, but they're not looking also at patient care.
Right.
And so that can be affected too, imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you can imagine, let's talk about cancer, something that's just so massive in our country right now. Imagine if it was you or your wife or your kids, you're waiting on a test result, and now that gets delayed because that lab has a short-staffed or they have a vacancy or whatever. Right. Now you're waiting maybe a week extra, and God forbid you are waiting on a cancer diagnosis. Could you imagine as the patient what that would feel like?
Right.
So
there's multiple reasons for keeping staff, and whether 100%. It be temporary or full-time.
Yeah, because we don't want the lab to fall behind. Patient care, I think, at least, for me, I'm sure it's the other way for other members of staffing agencies, but I think about the patient care as well, and that's half the reason I'm here too. It's not just the candidates, but I think about patient care and how that's affected, and I want to put the right person in the right role so that they can provide great patient care.